Okay, making 100% whole wheat bread. And this will be for a loaf that's about a pound, or around a pound of loaf. So ingredients. We have here just 5 or 6 grams of yeast, basically 1 teaspoon of fast rising yeast. We have here about 20 grams of molasses, which is about a tablespoon. I've got 10 grams of vegetable oil. You can use a tablespoon. That's a little bit more. A tablespoon's a little bit more than 10 grams, but that's okay. We've got 1 egg. Got 6 grams of salt. 200 grams of warm water, not hot water, because you don't want to kill the yeast. So about room temperature, about body temperature, around 100 degrees should be fine, or 98.6. And we've got 300 grams of whole wheat flour. So the first thing we do is put the water into the pan. Put the molasses in, and I'm going to need a spatula for that, I guess. So let's try that. All right, so I've got that in, most of it. Put the vegetable oil in. Okay, salt goes in. The egg goes in. Don't get any shell in it, of course. And then a little bit of the yeast should go in next. The order of this really isn't that critical, but it all needs to go in. And then put in, roughly a third of a cup or so. It's not critical how much you put in, but put just a small amount of the whole wheat flour in there, and that'll allow the yeast to get stuck to the whole wheat flour, and it'll help it in rising and being nice and soft bread. So first thing we need to do is really kind of clean this up a little bit here and mix this up, because of the egg mostly, but it all needs to be mixed up. Just taking a little whisk and whisking it all together, because I'm not whisk averse. Okay, so now we wait 15 minutes. Okay, it's been 15 minutes, and the unseen baker is here. So the next thing we need to do, you can see that the yeast is activated. There's little bubbles down in there underneath the oil and all that. Next thing we need to do, add the rest of the whole wheat flour. So we had 200 or 300 grams of whole wheat flour altogether, and that's all we've added to this thing in total is 300 grams. So let there be no confusion about that part of it. So I'm just going to mix it in here and mix and mix and mix. So I'm just continuing to mix, as messy as it looks. Notice my hands are not really touching the dough, so, and they don't need to. There isn't a lot of kneading that needs to be done with this bread, if any. So, and what kneading you do need to do, you can do it right here in the dish with the spatula. So that's what we're doing. Oh, sorry about that. Bumped the camera. So we're just going to mix this all up. until it's pretty good, pretty well mixed. As you can see, I'm folding it over, kind of just pulling it up with the spatula and folding it over on itself. And just doing that for a couple of minutes. Get the gluten working, get the yeast all mixed in there with everything else. There's a dry spot right there. See, still need to keep mixing. This is why watching a video is better than writing a recipe down, because things like that, you just can't write all that down in a recipe. Okay, well, it's looking pretty good. Scraped everything off the sides. I'm just going to let this sit. Okay, so the next thing we do is put the lid on it. So what we're going to do is turn our oven on for 60 seconds. This little timer. Oven's not on yet, but about 60 seconds. If it's a few seconds off, it doesn't matter. So, just going to turn the oven on. Doesn't matter what temperature, because it's only 60 seconds. What you're trying to do is just warm up the oven so that it has a nice place for this dough to rise. And so once it's gone off, I'll be back. Okay, the 60 seconds that we waited for the oven to warm up is over. So I turn the oven off. Make sure you do that part. I'm going to take my little, it's nice and warm in there, but not hot. I'm going to take my little bowl with the dough in it. And I'm going to set it in there. And I'm going to wait. Probably 60 minutes is what I'm going to wait, but I'm just going to wait for this this to start rising. So I'm just going to set this on an hour, 60 minutes, this little timer. Gee, I don't even have a digital oven like everybody else. I better get with the times. Anyway, in 60 minutes, we'll be back and take a look at the dough. Okay, it's been an hour. It's been an hour since we put that in there. Let's take a look. Let me back off here a little bit. Okay, there we go. So you can see it has way more than doubled in size in the last hour. So, and that's thanks to the warm oven and all the other stuff that we put in there. So we're going to take a look at this bread dough. It has risen nicely. I'm dipping my hands in cold water. That keeps the dough from sticking to your hands. You got to keep them pretty wet though. And I'm just going to start pulling this back, dipping, pulling back again. Sorry about hitting the camera. Maybe I better move. All right, so just pulling this stuff. What I'm doing here is kind of sort of kneading, but it's just stretching the gluten out. And you do it for a little while, and it doesn't take very long. And it starts tightening up. The dough starts tightening up. You can feel it. It gets a little harder and harder to push down, meaning that it's actually, the gluten is developing. And just trying to stretch this thing out. Maybe grab it and let it stretch out a little bit. Pull it over on itself. Kind of like what we were doing with the spatula, except now we're using our hands. And as you do that, it becomes less sticky. And then pretty soon you might not even need to have any water on your hands. I think we're basically getting to that stage now. So you can see you don't end up you don't end up kneading this or folding it over on itself for very long before it starts to become a viable loaf. So this is getting about to the stage where we can start forming it into a loaf now. Now, a lot of people will probably say, oh, you're not kneading that long enough. Well, okay, I've been making this for years and years, and it comes out fine, as you'll see. Anyway, now I'm going to take so I'm going to move my camera here. I've got a small loaf pan, and it should be fairly small for a 1 pound loaf that's whole wheat, because whole wheat bread doesn't rise quite as much as white flour does, for obvious reasons, if you've ever tried it. By small, this one is, let's see, 7.5 centimeters tall. It's roughly 11.5 centimeters wide, and about 20 to 20.5 centimeters long. So that's what I'm calling a small loaf. And I'm going to just take some of this spray oil and spray in the loaf pan good, so that we've got it coated, nothing's going to stick to it. I think we got everything now, pretty much. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm going to get my hands wet again, and I'm going to pick up this dough, and I'm just going to start pushing, kind of like rolling it into itself. If you look at the bottom, I'm just kind of pushing the edges into itself to tighten up the dough a little bit. This is basically how you would form a loaf. And then I'm going to put it right in the pan. So there it is. It's in the pan. It doesn't look like much right now, I know, but it's going to rise. So we'll take this and okay, I'm going to take this chopping bag, because it'll give it lots of room, the loaf lots of room. I'm going to put this over the loaf pan and kind of tuck it under a little bit. And what I'm trying to do here is just create a moist bubble around this while it rises. So I'm going to take this thing and pull it up. These bags are contraband in California, of course, so if you're out there, you just have to get some other kind of bag. And I'm going to put this in the oven. Now, if your oven isn't very warm, you still want it to be warm, so I'm going to probably take my oven and turn it on maybe for another 20 or 30 seconds, and then turn it off again and put this in there and let it rise for until it's fully risen. And that could take an hour. It could take 2 hours. If it's not very warm, it could take 3 hours. It could take a while. But a nice warm oven, it'll probably take an hour, maybe a little bit longer. Okay, so there it is, sitting in the oven to rise. And as you can see, I've pulled this bag up so that it has lots of room to rise, so that the dough doesn't rise and stick to the bag. You don't want that, obviously. So we're going to leave this in here for at least an hour, and it may take a little longer. I'll let you know how long it takes. Okay, so it's been an hour. Let's take a look at this thing. See how it's doing. That's all we're doing, seeing how it's doing. Oh boy, it is totally raised. Okay, didn't necessarily expect that, but thought it might take a little longer, but it didn't. So as you can see, it's about 3 or 4 times what it was when we put it in there an hour ago. And I'm setting it down very gently, because you don't want to You don't want it to fall. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just heat up the oven to 350 degrees. My old-fashioned analog oven. And then we're going to put that in for about 35 or 40 minutes. And we'll see how it turns out. All right, I guess I won't be the unknown baker. I'm about to put the bread in here. I've preheated my oven to 350 degrees, so it should be ready to go. I'm going to carefully, very carefully take this loaf. You don't want to jiggle these around much. Put it in here and just let it bake for 35 or 40 minutes. I'm probably going to take it to 40 minutes. I just find that works a little bit better. And so one thing I forgot to mention was if somebody wants to make this a vegan recipe, the only thing in it I think that isn't vegan is the egg. So if you wanted to leave that out, I don't think it would affect it much. I only put an egg in to add a little bit of protein to the loaf, but I really seriously doubt that's much of a factor, honestly. So just give it a try. Don't hurt. You won't lose anything other than maybe a little bit of flour and yeast. Okay, thank you. Okay, I just took this loaf out, and you can see it looks pretty good. What I usually do to let it cool off and not lose its moisture while it's cooling is I just take a towel, fold it over several times, and lay it on top of the thing. Just lay it on top, make sure it's nice, and it'll cool off really slowly, and it'll keep most of the moisture in. That'll take, it'll take more than an hour probably for it to cool off, but go do something else in the meantime. Okay, there it is. That's what it looks like. I know it tastes yummy because I've made this recipe lots of times. So there you go. That's what it looks like. Enjoy. Thank you.